So there's been a lot of discussion about which position is strongest in the upcoming 2025 patch, and with flashy guards and giant centers dominating the leaderboards, many people have started to overlook the forward position. However, forwards are actually one of the strongest builds in the entire league, and your party should look to obtain one if they want to reach elite status. So today we're going to review the forward position, and highlight which ones you should consider adding to your party. But first, let's talk about where forwards are as a whole in the current meta. It shouldn't come as a surprise that small forwards are an exceptionally flexible build that until the last few patches have held a high tier spot in the meta pretty consistently. The combination of their long wingspan and high mobility make them ideal for a variety of classes, ranging from melee berserkers to long-range snipers, and even defensive anchors. However, it's their two class abilities, Adaptability and Co-Star, which really allow their flexibility to shine through. Adaptability is a defensively based ability that gives the player boosted speed stats when guarding smaller players. But when matched up against larger players, it instead gives them a slight boost to their strength stat, allowing them to hold up in the post, at least until your allies can come in for assistance. Its paired offensive ability is Co-Star, which gives a boost in offensive stats across the board when receiving assists from their teammates, which is great for both fast-paced raids and slower traditional half-court style attacks. So that covers the basics for forwards. Let's get on to the tier list, starting with F tier. First up, we have Kyle Kuzma. This probably isn't too surprising, as Kuzma is infamous for his low defensive stats compared to most forwards. However, for those who haven't seen him, his poor defense doesn't just come from low base stats, but also a combination of mispositioning and lack of effort on a consistent basis. Simply put, it's almost impossible to hide him on the defensive end, where he's routinely exposed both on and off the ball. On the offensive end, you would assume he provides pretty good value to your party, as he has the mobility to work off-ball, as well as a plethora of flashier on-ball moves. But when looking closer, we can see that a rock-bottom intelligence stat leaves him completely unviable in today's meta. His off-ball movement leads to an abysmal 30% 3-point damage rate, and his above-average handling stat doesn't actually lead to efficient melee damage. At his current level, he basically actively takes away shots from your higher tier carries, and effectively decreases your party's damage each time he touches the ball, placing him firmly in F tier. In D tier, we have two veterans that you would love to have come off the bench, but might want to look to upgrade if they are one of your main carries, and that's Klay Thompson and Chris Middleton. Historically, Klay used his godlike shooting stats to barrage enemy parties with long-distance damage, leaving them scrambling to chase him all over the floor. And when parties overcommitted to covering his ranged attacks, he countered with a solid drive game that left his enemies few viable defensive strategies to choose from. Today, however, multiple injuries and age have sapped Klay's mobility, driving him to one of his least efficient years in terms of melee damage, and limiting his ability to defend enemy parties on the defensive end of the floor. He still remains a viable option to hire into your party, but you should look to use him as a range specialist rather than one of your core carries. Chris Middleton is our other player in the D tier, and in a similar position to Klay Thompson. He relies heavily on his Assassin perk, which increases his mid-range accuracy, and uses it to barrage his opponents with elite-level ranged attacks. This was an especially potent threat when coupled with Giannis's melee-style attack builds during his time in the Bucks party, and allowed him to be the main off-carry on a championship run during the 2021 patch. However, his age has slowed his ability to keep up with many scoring threats in the league, and he can be fairly easily exposed when isolated on the defensive end. This shouldn't prevent you from inviting him to your guild hall though, as his above-average scoring efficiency could be a huge boon to your bench if your options are limited. Up next is C tier, which contains starting-level small forwards with a wide range of skills and unique niches. Brandon Ingram is the first player on the list, with an offensive build based around scoring creation. His build is just a few small buffs away from being B or even A tier, but right now sits in an awkward spot. On the one hand, his ability to create his own shot is one of the premium skills in the league, but unfortunately isn't at the level of efficiency needed to make him the main carry on your team, despite his high usage. And on the defensive end, his lack of mobility drastically increases his vulnerability to the screening tactics used by other parties, which leads to fairly easy damage to your basket. With these large potential benefits, but significant drawbacks, he'll be a build to keep an eye on in the upcoming patches, as a major buff could send him rocketing up into the higher tiers. Next is Cam Johnson, who is similar to Ingram in that he has high offensive stats with limited defensive upside. However, in contrast to Ingram, he creates much less of his own offense, but is extremely efficient at inflicting damage when given the opportunity by other carries on his team. Adding Cam Johnson to your party gives you an efficient scorer from every level of the floor, as well as being a threat on your quicker raid-style attacks. Look for him to have a big year next patch, as his multi-level scoring threat is going to pair perfectly with the insane passing and playmaking of his S-tier teammate, Nikola Jokic. Last in the category is Dylan Brooks, a defensively focused build with extremely limited offensive production. Fortunately, he makes up for that with decent long-range attacks, which forces at least some aggro to him on the offensive end, as well as incredible defense on the other end of the floor. He also possesses the unique ability, Prankster, which allows him to draw fouls with minimal to no contact on both ends of the floor. Should you add Brooks to your party, your main concern should be to encourage his use of Prankster and high-level defense to disrupt the enemy party, while trying to maintain his antics just below the level of being kicked out of the game by the mods. Moving up a slot, we have OG Anunoby, a defensive specialist with the unique ability of Stalwart, which greatly increases his base strength. As far as defensive perks go, this is probably one of the best in the game, as it allows forwards to effectively guard players up to the center position. This flexibility is crucial in a defensive specialist build, as you never know who you may have to face in the end-season tournament. Anunoby does have a weakness though, and that is his lack of individual offensive ability. And while playmaking isn't nearly as crucial for forwards as it is for guards, Anunoby's pedestrian scoring inside and outside the three-point line does limit him from reaching the A-tier status. Keeping with defensive specialists, we have Amen Thompson. He has a unique ability you may be familiar with, Hustle, which lowers in-game fatigue. However, unlike some of the other offensive-focused builds, he uses Hustle to become an absolute menace on the defensive end, disrupting ball handlers, flying in for blocks, and shutting down what should be easy scoring opportunities for enemy parties. Offensively, his lack of ranged attacks makes him a tough fit in some party comps, and as of today, his scoring game relies heavily on his athleticism rather than a polished offensive game, which limits his ability to be a high-usage player on the offensive end. However, with only 2 patches under his belt, there's still a chance that his offensive skill set could catch up to his otherworldly athleticism, which would give him a shot at reaching the rarefied air of S tier. Finally, we have Franz Wagner, our more offensive-based B-tier forward. In comparison to our prior entries, his high usage rate shows he is one of the offensive engines of the Orlando Magic party. He can make solid skip passes to open shooters, quick passes to cutters, and find uncovered allies during his drive game. However, his offensive game is far from perfect, and without an efficient long-range attack, his ability to be placed in some high-tier parties is limited. Up next, we have A-tier. We start with Jaylen Brown, who shows great base stats, which combos nicely with the boost from the class abilities of a forward. Now, no one is saying that Brown didn't have a slight downturn last patch. His efficiency stats fell across the board, despite his usage rate staying at about 29%. However, his assists and free throw attempts were at an all-time high, and should his long-range attacks rebound this year, I would expect him to be back at the offensive levels we saw in the 2023 patch. The next player in A-tier is Jimmy Butler, who has solid stats across the board, as well as the unique abilities of Opportunist and Stall. Jimmy is an incredibly intelligent player who weaves his way into the paint in order to proc Opportunist, which allows him to increase the rate of his drawn fouls and send himself to the line. From there, he chips away at the opponent's basket with hyper-efficient damage. Stall, which allows Jimmy to make his moves after his opponents, only further boosts his Opportunist ability. He does, however, have 2 major drawbacks. The first being that he rarely attempts any long-range attacks, and when he does, it's with limited accuracy. The second is his limited durability. His number of games played is lower than you'd expect, hovering around 60 for the past 8 patches, and even in the games he does play, his efficacy is limited during non-tournament games. Our final player in A-tier is Jalen Williams, who's an all-around player with almost 0 weaknesses in his game. Anything you could want in a forward, he delivers. He has a solid ranged game, landing almost 37% of his attacks from behind the arc, and shows solid abilities to finish around the rim, all while creating scoring opportunities for his lower tier party members. And that's without mentioning his defensive prowess, which is bolstered by his unique ability Long Reach, which drastically increases his range, allowing him to interrupt passing lanes and start new raids on the enemy basket. And you may be asking, how is Jalen not an S tier forward? Well, as with everything, it's simply a matter of perspective. LeBron James, an absolute legend in every sense of the word, and our first S-tier forward. LeBron James' offensive and intelligence stats are otherworldly, and while his mobility and defense have taken a small hit from his prime, they're still well within the range to keep him in the S-tier. But what makes LeBron special is actually his 3 unique abilities, given to him by the massive amount of XP he's accumulated over the course of his career. The first, Zen Mode, gives a boost to all of LeBron's stats when in a high-pressure situation. Shockingly, this can even apply to entire games, should the pressure of the moment be high enough to meet the criteria. This combines perfectly with his second ability, Overlord, which bumps his stats yet again for every party he defeats during the post-patch tournament. And you might be saying to yourself, that seems a bit broken. And you'd be right. Should you face him in the later stages of the tournament, he becomes practically a team unto himself with his supernaturally high base stats. And finally, there's the Telepathy ability, which allows LeBron to anticipate both his allies and his opponent's next moves. This is an incredible ability on both ends of the floor, as it allows him to both shut down opposing parties' plays before they begin, as well as give him an almost supernatural sense of where his teammates are on all ends of the floor. Parties have tried and failed to come up with ways to limit LeBron's impact for dozens of patches, across all types of metas and different party compositions. Should you find yourself against him, your best hope is to weather the storm and exploit his weaker party members to eke out a victory. Last but not least, we have Kevin Durant. Durant is the epitome of a pure shooter, the build of a forward to boost his performance on both ends of the floor. His offensive range stats are nearly through the roof, and he combines that with his abilities Assassinate and Keen Eye to make ranged attacks go in at a level not seen anywhere else in the league. Durant is dangerous from any spot on the court, and uses his height to shoot over your party members even if they're actively contesting his shot. He's the ultimate floor spacer and can slot into any team comp in the league with little to no issues. On the defensive end, he has lost a step from his peak patches, but still shouldn't be overlooked for his contributions. His rangy build allows him to disrupt passing lanes and block enemies' attacks on a regular basis, and his defense has shown to hold up in the high-level lobbies of the postseason tournament in the past. If your party has the slightest chance to obtain him, be sure to act now, because even with 17 patches played, you should expect Durant to perform at an elite level for the foreseeable future. And that's the tier list. Thanks for watching. Let me know if I missed out on your favorite player, as I'll be doing more tier lists on individual parties in the near future.